What's up YouTube? Welcome back to another episode of Boss Recap, where we rate and analyze the structure of boss battles in our favorite video games. I'm your host DMLX, and today we'll be covering the action-packed, crystal-shattering part-time kaiju spectacle JRPG, Final Fantasy XVI. Published by Square Enix and developed by Creative Business Unit 3, Final Fantasy XVI was released on June 22nd, 2023, and has quickly become one of the most iconic games owned for PS5. Taking the beloved long-running JRPG franchise to new heights that feature a wide range of segmented open environments to explore, and a newly stylized action-based combat system that allows players to juggle between melee and magic-based attacks. The game is set in the two continents of Valisthea, the domain of 6 nations who hold power through access to magical crystals and dominance. Dominants are humans who are the hosts for each nation's icon and can use their power in battle. Icons are colossal magical beings composed of ether, and there are 7 icons that inhabit the world of Valisthea, which include the Phoenix, Garuda, Titan, Odin, Bahamut, Ifrit, Rama, and Leviathan, with Leviathan being the only icon not present in the main campaign.
Where is it? You never give it to an ordinary citizen! Where is it? Where is it?
Tensions between the nations escalate as a magical drought described as the Blight begins consuming the land, which then has players take control of Clive Rosfield, son of the Archduke and Shield of Rosaria, who witnessed his kingdom and family destroyed in front of his very eyes. Seeking vengeance, Clive ends up becoming more involved in the growing conflict between Valisthea's nations and the secret power behind the war tied to his connection with the dark icon of fire, Ifrit. Final Fantasy XVI's combat places players in the same area they navigate through, entering battle once the enemy is in close proximity to the party. Clive is the only controllable character, but will be assisted by various AI companions as players progress through the story, which include the likes of Sid, the dominant of Ramuh, Jill, the dominant of Shiva, Joshua, the dominant of Phoenix, spoilers, and the best doggo in all of gaming, Torgal, who is uniquely the only companion in Final Fantasy XVI Clive can give commands to perform special attacks or heal in-game. While in battle, Clive can use normal attacks, a dodge, and use elemental abilities from icons he's obtained by taking the powers of the dominants he will encounter throughout his journey. Clive can switch between different icon abilities during battle, string them together into different combo attacks to deliver massive damage. Final Fantasy XVI also brings back the stagger mechanic, where the party deals specific types of damage which build up a stagger meter to stun an enemy, allowing Clive and his allies to unleash heavy amounts of damage within a brief period of time, as well as quick-time events integrated into high-profile encounters that will be used for players to have Clive execute significant strikes, evasive maneuvers, or button-mashing clashes. So with that being said, let's see how Clive managed to break the chains of fate and put an end to the Age of Crystals once and for all. There are a total of 38 bosses in Final Fantasy XVI, 31 bosses are tackled as Clive in his human form, 6 bosses are purely icon battles which have players take part in kaiju-like spectacles that will push one's PS5's cooling system to the brink. And then there's the final boss, Ultimalius, being a mixture of both, where players take control of Clive in the first and third phases of the fight, while the second phase is an icon battle that takes place in the void of space and time collapsing on itself, where most final bosses in JRPGs tend to go down. Multiple boss fights are spread throughout each chapter of Final Fantasy XVI. As Clive, you will confront each boss in an open arena-like setting, where you can move freely and engage in the fight how you see fit, while icon battles will often take a more cinematic approach, implementing more quick-time events, and even deviating from the traditional gameplay mechanics of Final Fantasy XVI, whether it's having portions of the icon showdowns play out more like a rail shooter, an endless running platformer, or free-falling down to the center of the earth. When looking at the HUD, every boss's health and stagger bar is horizontally parallel to Clive's in both size and length. The rules of engagement against every boss in Final Fantasy XVI are quite simple and fairly forgiving compared to other action slasher JRPGs. Think of it as like following the 5 Ds of dodgeball.
If you master the 5 Ds, no amount of balls on earth can hit you.
What?
Basically, precision dodges and counters are the key to success in Final Fantasy XVI. And from my experience, the skill gap in avoiding enemy attacks and dishing out damage isn't remarkably high, even on Final Fantasy mode, the hardest difficulty in the game. Also, specific boss fights have special desperation moves that trigger a segment called Press the Attack, which will change the boss's health and stagger bars into a single glowing purple bar, forcing players to go on the offensive and deplete the bar as fast as possible before the opposition can unleash an attack that will do heavy amounts of damage, or in some cases take you to the game over screen in an instant. When looking at the boss tier scale for Final Fantasy XVI, I'm going to give the boss lineup an A tier for the fights as Clive, But since there are two different types of boss fights in Final Fantasy XVI, I'm also going to give the game an S tier rating for fights as an icon. There's a lot of variety and creativity amongst the bosses in Final Fantasy XVI. The designs for every boss were well crafted, encounters were well balanced in terms of difficulty, delivering on the spectacle and the fast-paced nature of Final Fantasy XVI's combat as advertised, as well as providing unique movesets for each boss that were a visual feast for the eyes, especially the icon battles. Those fights alone were worth the price of admission, even though those sections of Final Fantasy XVI were arguably the least challenging portions of the game. The Soulsborne award for the hardest boss fight as Clive goes to the second encounter with Barnabas. For me, replaying this fight on Final Fantasy mode was the first true test of my ability in mastering the combat mechanics of Final Fantasy XVI, especially during the latter part of the fight with Barnabas, who can perform attacks that can cover the entire arena that will deliver heavy amounts of damage if your dodges and counters are not on point. The hardest icon boss fight goes to Typhon. Now, I'm not out here claiming that Typhon was so difficult to the point where I wanted to break my controller in half, but there were moments throughout the fight where I felt real pressure when it came down to evading Typhon's relentless onslaught, especially on my first playthrough of Final Fantasy XVI, seeing that during Typhon's second phase, its attacks would cover a wide range of space. The Great Mighty Pooh award for the worst boss fight goes to Tiamat. As a boss, Tiamat was tame and basic in terms of moveset, design, and overall story significance, boiling down to just playing off as a standard NPC bearer that was just given an unnecessary amount of health to bat around for a good couple of minutes. The worst icon boss fight goes to Phoenix vs Ifrit. Don't get me wrong, cinematically this fight was a nice setup for future icon battles to come, but from a gameplay perspective it was fairly one note, with the Phoenix only able to shoot a barrage of fireballs at Ifrit and dodge easily telegraphed attacks. The Bowser Jr. award for the easiest boss fight goes to the first encounter with Barnabas during the Naldea Narrow chapter. Seeing that this is the only boss fight in the game that you don't technically beat, this encounter with Barnabas below the sea is meant to be the stepping stone for what lies ahead, and you only have to take away less than 10% of his health, which will then trigger Barnabas to start generating dark energy for his Iron Flash attack, then besting Clive and then having him live to fight another day. The easiest icon boss fight goes to Ultima Prime, because that encounter is purely just a playable cutscene through and through, but a highly entertaining playable cutscene nonetheless, seeing that it was a 3v1 fight with Ifrit, Bahamut, and Phoenix ganging up on Ultima Prime in one of the most over-the-top monster battles I've seen in a video game. The Golden Pickaxe award for the most creative boss fight goes to Garuda. Based on the sheer scale of the fight of having Clive go up against an icon one-on-one, not to mention Garuda having one of the best creature designs I've seen in a Final Fantasy game. Also, the fight takes place in the middle of a tornado with debris flying around while Garuda swipes away at Clive like a cat trying to catch a mouse. The most creative icon boss fight goes to Bahamut, due to its gameplay structure of transitioning back and forth between playing as Ifrit and the Phoenix, to then having both icons of fire fused together to become Ifrit Ryzen, evening the playing field and providing some satisfying aerial combat against the icon of light. The Ultimate Showdown award for the best boss fight goes to Ultimalius. Now, this may have not been the toughest challenge for most, but the final boss fight of Final Fantasy XVI delivered on all accounts in terms of build-up, spectacle, and emotional payoff, right down to when Clive and Ultima test each other's mastery of each icon's power. And that quick time event where Clive lands a clean right hook on Ultima's jaw was one of the most satisfying finishing blows in a video game I've experienced in quite a while. Best icon boss fight goes to Titan. Living up to the name, facing off against Titan was undoubtedly one of the biggest highlights of the game for me. Each phase of the fight was a fun and thrilling experience to be had, providing top-tier choreographed action, large-scale set pieces, and flashy quicktime events, mainly during the Titan Lost segment, which I believe rivals that of Kratos fighting Kronos in God of War 3. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Square Enix poured half of the budget of this game into the Titan Lost portion alone. Not to mention the climactic freefall section of the fight, adding a whole nother layer of exhilaration and combative flair to one roller coaster of a boss fight. So what you guys think in the comments down below about the boss battles in Final Fantasy XVI? Do you think these fights were some of the best that the series had to offer? And which boss fights stood out to you the most? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button, it really helps me out. Subscribe for more content from me on Final Fantasy XVI and other games in general. I'm DMLX. I'll see you in the future.